Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the Reformation, right? Now, this is going to be the last of, well, a little bit now and a little bit in class, but we're going to be kind of now moving away from the Reformation or kind of closing it out, right? Now, what we're moving into at this point is we're getting into religious warfare and religious violence, right? We're getting into the fact that after Charles V and after the reign of that Holy Roman Emperor, we saw a precedent being set, right? So, like, just to give you a heads up, a precedent is kind of like an informal tradition or kind of a thing that demonstrates to us what things will happen in the later years of history. This precedent is going to be the fact that we're going to have some violence on our hands, right? We're going to have some violence, some religious warfare that's going to be breaking out throughout most of Europe, and some different things like that. Now, getting into this flip in general, first thing you're going to notice is a little bit shorter than some of the other ones that we've done because it's about to be a really intense story and a lot of content. So do me a favor, just kind of like really try to focus in hard for these next few minutes. We're going to talk about religious warfare, particularly talking about the religious wars that broke out in France, okay? So the thing that you need to understand, though, is under the reign of Charles V, when we were talking about the Schmalkaldic Wars, his wars in northern Italy, and, you know, different military engagements like that, what's going to end up happening is it's going to demonstrate to not only the Holy Roman Empire, but also members of the entire European continent that basically religion is going to be an instigator now of warfare, right? We're going to get literally different, like, Protestant sects going against different Catholic sects and stuff like that. And what we need to do today is we're going to focus in particularly on what happened in France, okay? So the thing that you need to understand is that these qualms between these two groups are absolutely aggressive, right? Catholics and Protestants by this point are referring to each other as agents of Satan in some of their masses and things like that, getting parishes and getting, like, what's the congregations galvanized enough to the point believing that the other side is pure evil and needs to be stomped out, right? So you have to understand that this violence, this aggression is going to bubble over and it's going to blow up. And it blew up particularly in France, where they had not one war of religion, but 7 wars of religion, okay? I'm going to say that again, 7 wars of religion, pretty much back to back to back to back to back, okay? Now, in France, though, they were being ruled at the time by King Francis I, whenever the Reformation finally breaks out, right? Francis I is the same exact dude that actually, like, wrestled Henry VIII and, like, he won. He actually beat him and stuff like that. Francis I is the guy that was around when John Calvin was actually doing his stuff, when the affair of the placards happened, when the posters showed up on the King of France's door. It was Francis I's door, right? Francis I is also what is famously known as a Valois king, right? His last name or his creed, or not his creed, but his crest would be a Valois one, right? So just like Tudors in England, and we'll talk about later on in Prussia, the Hohenzollerns, the big one, and he talked about the Habsburgs in Austria and the Habsburgs in Spain, again, we're also already. The ones that we're talking about now are the Valois of France. Now, Francis I is going to be the last really strong, pure-blood leader of the Valois family in France. He made a lot of money. He loved to patron different artworks. He is considered the Renaissance king of France himself. He literally had this bad boy that you will see in Paris if you come with us this summer. That bad boy right there, the Mona Lisa, hung in his bathroom because he was obsessed with the work of Leonardo da Vinci. He also had a lot of different chateaus built and things like that because he literally made some deals with the Pope and the papacy, and he also had some, like, different taxes that were bringing in a substantial amount of money. And just so you also know as well, do y'all remember that time we talked about that $60 million salt shaker? Yeah, it's Francis I, right? So the thing about it that we need to understand is that Francis I, being a heavy participant in the Renaissance, being able to accrue massive amounts of wealth, building chateaus all over France and stuff like that, interestingly enough, he's going to stay out of the crosshairs of the papacy for a pretty good while. Reason being is because he's going to make some deals, okay? Like, so he's going to make some deals to the point where he doesn't have to spend a lot of money on actually wars and things like that early on, okay? Now, his subsequent inheritance, his subsequent throne inheritors, right, his actual secessionary people, his sons is the word I'm looking for there. God, that was such an easy word. His sons, on the other hand, are going to inherit a lot of problems. Francis I, on the other hand, though, didn't really have to worry too much about Protestantism breaking out in his country. I mean, the one time that he had a guy, John Calvin, that was about to start a Protestant sect in his country, he scared him so bad that he ran away to Switzerland, right? Well, the thing about it is how does Francis I manage to actually avoid this? Well, the big thing about it is because Francis I had made several deals with the Pope in 1516. The Concordat of Bologna being the big one. Don't asked me why, the AP test loves to ask about the Concordat of Bologna. But the Concordat of Bologna is the deal between Francis I and the Pope at the time to actually avoid France leaving Catholicism, okay? So something you need to understand is that what it's going to do is going to permit the Pope to collect the income of the Catholic Church main in France, while as the King of France is allowed to appoint his own bishops and things like that. And it actually, this agreement between the two of them prevented Francis I from breaking away from the papacy, i.e. Henry VIII, right? It also prevented him, and also helped him stomp out a lot of early Protestant sects like John Calvin when he actually ran him off. Now, the thing about it, though, is after Francis I dies and towards the end of his papacy, though, some of these Calvinists are going to come back, and they're referred to as the Huguenots, or the Huguenots, as you actually say them in France, because I don't know if you know this or not, but in French, you don't say anything at the very end of the word, it seems like. It's like, and then you don't say the T on it. But it's actually the Huguenots, but I like to say Huguenots, not huge knots, all right? So, for anybody who's reading this right now, the big thing about it, though, is the Huguenots are a Calvinist sect, just like the Puritans, who are going to come back from Switzerland and move back into Paris and back into France. They are French Calvinists. Now, the Huguenots, though, are having a very, very easy time converting people, and this is after King Francis I is already dead, right? Francis I dies, and his son inherits the throne, okay? His son's name is Henry II, okay? Now, Henry II would have been a really, really solid king to actually deal with all this stuff. He wasn't a really bad king. He was really, really pretty good one at that. He actually had a lot of very, very solid political measures. He actually, though, also, unfortunately, loved to joust. My man literally loved one sport in particular, and he loved to joust, right? And it actually ends up leading to his death. The thing about it is by the time Henry II dies, okay, the son of Francis I, Henry II has had 3 sons, okay, and we'll talk about them here in a few minutes. So he has heirs to the throne, which is great. But the thing about it that ends up happening, though, is about 1 in every 10 French citizens has converted to being a Calvinist or a Huguenot in the last handful of years, in the last about give or take, I think it's about 30 years. So that's a very large number. 10% of all French people have now converted to this new sect of Protestantism. But the scary part about it is about half of all the nobility has converted. So what the Valois have on their hands right now is an issue of German princes, right? And what I mean by that is German princes didn't show up in France or anything like that, but just like the German princes that were out in the Holy Roman Empire, converting to Lutheranism to give them more political power so they could say no to their monarch, i.e. Charles V. The same thing is happening in France, okay? What's going on in France is these nobles are converting to Huguenotism, or to Calvinism and to Protestantism, so they can actually be able to curry their own favor, grow their power. And a key premise of Calvinism is that if your leader does not abide by the laws of your church or the laws of God, you don't have to listen to him. So the thing about it in general is this is creating a big shakeup in the power structure of France. And Henry II is unable to bring a close or an end to this conversion of French people to Protestantism because he dies when he gets a lance to the eye. All right, so now, really, really quickly, what a lance is, the thing that they actually use to joust. One time during a joust where he was celebrating the end of a war with Spain, literally the joust, he's coming down this way, the other jouster's coming this way, and their lances collide with each other, and they explode, right? They go, whoosh. And so what ends up happening, though, is literally one of the splinters goes in through the eye of his helmet and goes in through the little slit and goes into his eye and causes a massive swollen brain and brain infection. And he gets little splinters all inside of his brain, and it ends up killing him, right? But he actually left 3 very young sons up to the task of actually becoming the kings of France. Now, one of them we've actually talked about for 2 seconds. Francis II is Mary Queen of Scots' first husband, right? So now, Francis II, though, unfortunately, was only king of France for 5 minutes because he died a little bit sooner on as well. Charles IX and Henry III, though, are going to do some different stuff. But when Henry dies, his sons are a little bit too young and a little bit too weak to actually be in charge. So the rulership passes to the Queen Regent, Catherine de' Medici. That's right, we got another Medici on our hands. It's running around all outside of Italy and stuff like that. This doesn't feel like it's supposed to be happening. But Catherine de' Medici is the queen ruler for her children. Now, what a queen regent is, it's a ruler when your child is too young. So when Francis II actually came to power originally, he was already married and stuff like that, but he ends up dying pretty soon after. Charles IX also comes to power too young to actually be in charge, but still, even when he does come of age and actually is able to become king, Catherine de' Medici stays in his ear, okay? And by the way, when we looked at Bloody Mary apparently killed and burned to death maybe a few hundred Protestants. Catherine de' Medici is going to kill a lot more Protestants than that, and she doesn't even get a nickname, all right? So Bloody Mary maybe should have, paid attention. The thing about it, though, is, well, Bloody Mary came first. But still, the thing that we need to understand, though, also, is many French nobles were beginning to convert to Huguenotism, or to Protestantism, for political and anti-monarchical reasons, kind of like we just talked about on the last slide. A lot of them are converting because they don't want to listen to the crown anymore. And what's happening is it's causing a massive amount of dysfunction between the nobles that are converting to Protestantism and then this new family that's on the scene that's actually relatives of the crown, right? They are cousins of the Valois family and also of Medici as well, or Catherine de' Medici, and they are known as the Guise family, right? The Guise family is a noble family that is very, very powerful, very, very wealthy, and has a very, very large military replete with the ideas in the back of their mind of being super Catholic and trying to stop the spread of Protestantism. The Guise family, allied with, basically allied with the crown, decides that they're going to take it upon themselves to try and stomp out Huguenots, and as they begin to convert. And so they start running up inside of churches. They start destroying a lot of different churches and things like that. And then also, on top of everything else, Calvinists were kind of doing it back to them as well. You have to understand that the Huguenots are Calvinists, and Calvinists believe that iconoclasms are a great way to protest against the Catholic Church. So you had this massive overlapping of violence, right? Huguenots are going to be perpetrating iconoclasms. The Guise family is going to be running up into church services and killing people when they're actually converting to Protestantism and things like that. And these things, these iconoclasms, are going to be considered the very first French war of religion, okay? Many other things are going to lead to an armed conflict and huge public executions of Huguenots, and this entire thing is known as the very first war of religion in France, okay? Between the Protestant Huguenots and then also the Catholic Guise forces, right? Now, the Guises, though, were, of course, supported by the crown and of Catherine de' Medici as well. And the thing that you need to understand about it, though, in general, sorry about that, France is going to have two more subsequent ones as well. They're going to have a second war of religion caused by pretty much the exact same thing, and then the third French war of religion, pretty much caused by the exact same thing. Guises versus Protestants, right? Catholics versus Protestants. Now, oh, by the way, Guise is spelled G-U-I-S-E. Now, the thing about it going into it, the biggest results of these wars, these early French wars of religion, are, one, stalemates. No one's really, truly winning, okay? So something that we got to understand about warfare in general when it comes to European history is the last thing you want to ever result is what's called a stalemate, right? And a stalemate is when no side is really winning, but you're still killing each other, right? So you're having massive loss of life, but no one's really gaining any kind of territorial ground. But what is also happening is several French cities are beginning to become strongholds for Protestant sects, okay? So for Huguenots in general. Ones like Cognac, Montauban, and a very, very famous one known as La Rochelle. La Rochelle basically becomes the Protestant capital of France. La Rochelle is a coastal town in the west of France that is going to be a very, very important player when you get into the era of absolutism. Because we'll talk about this French cardinal who was not a fan of La Rochelle and is going to siege it and try to destroy it. And we're going to have a lot of overlapping storylines that are going to be going on all at once, right? So something that we need to understand, though, as well, is that as Queen Regent, Catherine de' Medici was the advisor for not one, but three of her sons, Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III. So she was present for all of these different things. But what she begins to notice, Catherine de' Medici begins to notice, is the fact that basically we've got a problem. It's destroying the French economy. It's weakening our entire country. We need to figure out a way to bring an end to all this violence, right? Because the nobles control all this land that is then farmed by the serfs and things like that, because feudalism is still pretty active. It's weakening in efficiency, but it's still active. And so she wants to bring an end to this violence to make sure that the economy is not being stifled, and so they're also not weakening the French military for any future wars, right? So to help stop it, she decides that she will bring peace to the wars of religion by having her daughter, Margaret Valois, because she's got a lot of weak sons. Like Charles IX is not very, very strong. He's not going to make it for very long. Henry III is going to get stabbed to death. And so what's going to end up happening, though, is she decides to help bring an end to the violence that she would take her daughter, a Catholic princess, and marry her off to a Protestant noble, right? The thing that you need to understand is that also all of this was beginning to come from the fact that Catherine was beginning to advocate for religious tolerance, about allowing Protestant advisors to return to her son and stuff like that. Charles IX was a very weak son, had a Protestant advisor that was directly very, very close to him. The Guise family was furious about all this stuff. But going into it, she decides to allow her daughter, Margaret Valois, to marry a very, very famous Protestant noble, and the strongest of all the Protestant nobles, a man by the name of Henry of Navarre. Now, she told him, though, she was like, look, if we're going to allow you to marry your way into the royalty, you're going to need to convert to Catholicism, okay? So Henry agrees to this and stuff like that. He's like, okay, fine, I'll convert to Catholicism if I have to and stuff like that. And the big thing about it is that the Protestants feel as though they're getting a massive victory out of this. They feel like they're getting a huge victory. So hundreds of Huguenots show up to watch the wedding of their leader, Henry of Navarre, to the Catholic princess that they would actually be basically having one of their own integrated into the royal family. And now he's in the line of succession, right? So hundreds of Huguenots showed up to the wedding. But what ended up happening at the wedding is a famous event in European history known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. This is the big thing that Catherine the Medici does, who should make her like the ice queen instead of Scary Mary. Now look, the hundreds of Huguenot nobles show up and were in attendance at the wedding, and 3 days after the wedding actually happened, a massive massacre broke out, which could have been actually instigated by an assassination attempt, right? So the thing that actually went down was that literally the advisor that had returned to Charles IX was shot at, and he didn't die, but he was like almost like killed, and he was a Huguenot, right? And so we had this like violence breaking out in the streets, and eventually Catherine de' Medici decides to have the doors of Paris shut, and she decides to actually have a massive massacre 3 days after her daughter's wedding, right? The people of Paris mobbed, egged on by the Catholics, mobbed and murdered Protestants in the street. And historians have no idea how many people died in St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre as the violence began to sweep the countryside. It could be anywhere from 3,000 people died or 70,000 people died on this crazy, intense day. But what's going to happen, though, is Henry, absolutely furious about this, the Protestant noble, is going to go back to his Protestant buddies, and so begins the other war of religion, the fourth war of religion, right? Religious wars would rage on throughout France for the next 15 years, almost completely collapsing the French economy, right? Now, the thing that you need to understand about it as well, though, is the last one was known as the War of the Three Henrys, all right? So now, the War of the Three Henrys is because it was between Henry Guise, right? Henry Guise, the Catholic leader, Henry III, the new king of France, right? Catherine's youngest son, and then also Henry of Navarre, right? And that's why it's known as the War of the Three Henrys, right? The reason why it's called that is because Henry III was considering doing what his mom almost did before she killed a bunch of people, actually allowing Protestantism to exist. Henry Guise is the Catholic cousin that wants to put himself in power, and then Henry of Navarre is supporting the Protestants, right? But what happens in the War of the Three Henrys is Henry III, the King of France, gets assassinated by a Catholic monk, gets stabbed to death by him and stuff like that. So that means there is now actually a vacancy on the throne. And if Francis II, son of Catherine de' Medici, is dead, Charles IX, son of Catherine de' Medici, is dead, Henry III, son of Catherine de' Medici, is dead because he just got stabbed to death by a Catholic monk and stuff like that during the War of the Three Henrys. That means that there's only one more person to inherit the throne, and it's none other than Henry of Navarre, right? And Henry of Navarre, the Protestant noble, realizes in that moment the only way he's going to bring an end to the violence in France is by coming to power and officially converting to Catholicism, but he wants to help out his Protestant friends in the process, right? He said a famous quote that when he decided to ascend the throne, and by the way, the Valois family is now done because in this whole process, Catherine de' Medici has died. The Valois family is now done and dead, and now his family, Henry's family, comes to power, and they're known as the Bourbon dynasty. Yes, the same exact family that the Bourbon Street in New Orleans is named after, right? So Henry III, though, or excuse me, not Henry III, Henry of Navarre, now Henry IV, some refer to him as Henry the Great, actually comes in and then signs a very famous document that is highlighted in red right there that you need to put a giant star next to. And it is called the Edict of Nantes. And what this thing did is it gave freedom from persecution to Huguenots and other Protestants in 1598, recognizing Protestantism as a recognized religion in the Kingdom of France. Just like the Peace of Augsburg did in the Holy Roman Empire for Lutherans, the Edict of Nantes said that Protestants are allowed to function in France underneath the new crown. Also, with the Edict of Nantes as well, it said that the Catholicism would be the official religion of France. However, Protestantism would be allowed. And so Henry the Great, or like what some people refer to him as Henry the Great, because he apparently crushed this thing known as the Catholic League of France. This is him right here, depicted as Hercules slaying the Hydra being the Catholic League, and him, that being Henry right there. He actually is going to be the guy who's paving the road to absolutism, because his family, the Bourbon family, will be the first absolutists of all of France. And that right there is where we're going to stop. Okay, so you see what I'm talking about? Nice short flip. Very, very intense thing, but we'll review the whole thing tomorrow. And I'm also going to be posting in Google Classroom another link to another video that if you want to watch, it might help it explain it a little bit better. It's got like cartoony little animations and stuff like that. But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.